Conservative, liberal, progressive, absurd, you name it, it does exist today. But what you know about is only what manages to get through the distribution channels. There are plenty of artists doing things, I'm taking this on faith, but I'm sure that there are people who are making music and doing all kinds of things which are progressive, but you just don't hear about them.
Well, not hearing about them means that for a lot of people, not hearing it on the radio, and we've had now, I don't know if this is coincidence, but now music is accessible through the portability of portable cassette machines and stuff. So is that a way of getting around having to go through a radio station if you have songs with, quote, obscene lyrics on it?
I don't know whether I would think of that as the way to get around hearing it on the radio. I mean, what's the big deal? I mean, these are only words. Remember that thing about sticks and stones can break your bones? Words will never hurt you?
Yes, but words could cause you to lose your radio station license.
Yeah, well, I think that is the product of an administration which is not to be trusted, installing people who would like to put a clamp on the marketplace of ideas. And they use the whole issue of obscenity to create a mechanism whereby all ideas can be filtered, sorted out, and controlled by the government. It's a police state mentality. The FCC was originally chartered to make sure that your transmitter doesn't get suddenly turned up and blow out somebody else's transmitter. It was to regulate transmissions. It wasn't to regulate ideas. It wasn't to regulate speech. It was never chartered as a censorship organization.
But now we have pending congressional hearings and such, something called the Helms Amendment, where they're proposing a 24-hour ban on anything questionable at all. Indeed, KPFK, our radio station, had to spend lots of money last year to secure with lawyers that when we read a celebrity reading of The Grapes of Wrath, we wouldn't get our butt in a sling with the government. What are your feelings about the proposed Helms Amendment?
Well, they've been after Pacifica for years and years and years, and Jesse Helms I have no respect for. I won't say he's a stupid man, because I've seen him do some things which are fairly clever, but I think that he's a menace to the Constitution. That's the nicest thing you could say about him. And I hope that his challenger in this senatorial contest that's coming up is successful. In fact, maybe some of your listeners might want to send a few dollars to the campaign of Helms' opponent and support that candidate to give him some ammunition to get Jesse out of there. Because a man like Jesse Helms has no place in the U.S. Senate. He would have done pretty well in Hitler's cabinet, but not in the U.S. Senate.
So before all this had occurred, we had, you said before Pacifica had trouble for years, going back to the 70s with the Carlin case and more recently with KPFK, the Jerker. Since broadcasting is everywhere and you can't always stop it from playing if you're in a car or in a mall or whatever like that.
That's ridiculous. Anybody, if you're smart enough to turn a radio on, you got to be smart enough to turn it off. And if something is offending your ears, I mean, how much protection do you really want in this society? And what are you willing to give up in order to have protection from words that some people don't like? What are we willing to throw away in order to make sure that no word that Jesse Helms disapproves of ever escapes the lips or squeaks out through the airwaves on anybody's radio station? What are we really willing to give up in order to have that kind of security? Who are we protecting, and what is the net result of the protection? And how could we be so stupid as to even involve ourselves in a discussion of a matter of so little consequence? It's about little words, not even long words.
They had a special committee developed for considering what Helms is proposing, and rumor through the grapevine says that committee stacked. It's kind of was just a fake thing to go through the motions, but actually the Helms Amendment is going to pass, and material of an artistic or sensitive nature won't be able to be played without risking your license.
Well, then I suggest you plan on moving to a place like Czechoslovakia. Might be a lot freer there within the next couple of years than the United States will be. In fact, Romania might look like paradise by the time Jesse Helms gets done with what he's doing here.
Certainly I don't believe it, but the radical right seems to be, their biggest argument is that exposure of sensitive material will somehow influence the values of young children, young and impressionable kids who will model or mimic the values or the things that they hear about. What are your
Well, I'm
feelings
more
on that?
concerned that these people would watch religious broadcasting and model and mimic the values of some of those television evangelists. I mean, if you've exposed your child to years upon years of watching Jimmy Swaggart, I mean, if he didn't even use any four-letter words, and I think he could be hazardous to your mental health. And how about Jim and Tammy? And how about even watching Ronald Reagan, this, the maraca-brained nothingness, running a country? I mean, all of this could be injurious to your mental health. Depends on your point of view. There's some people who think that Swaggart is fabulous and he's a nice guy and he should be on television, and that Jim Baker got a wrong deal, that he should have been allowed to make as much money as he could selling those condos, and that Tammy Faye is a wonderful person. There are people who believe that. I happen to think they're wrong. I also happen to think that if you use four-letter words, that doesn't make you a criminal. It doesn't make you a sinner either.
Why does it make parents with a somewhat even liberal or moderate orientation nervous then?
I have no idea. I think that's probably a mental health problem. A lot of this is a mental health problem. I've said in other interviews, the only way that a person could buy into their argument is if they had gone through 12 years of an American education. Anybody who comes out of the school system could be just numb enough to think that these guys had some merit in their argument, when if you'd avoided a lot of that, you might see through common sense that they're wrong. They're wrong. They're varmints. We got to get them.
So, you don't think kids would be socialized by hearing songs that have violence towards women in them, or talking about drugs, or talking about sex? Two Live Crew records.
Yeah.
You're a parent. I don't know how young your youngest is, but you wouldn't mind him being exposed to that?
Of course not. What? What's going to happen if you hear a record that says, "Me so horny"? Is the world going to stop?
Yeah, I think a part of a lot of people's paranoia is because they're reading into it from an adult's point of view, and a 4-year-old might not even know what that means or care what that means. It's just abstract.
How many
words.
4-year-olds do you know who know what the word horny means?
Exactly.
And if they do, then it ain't going to harm them, is it?
What about videos where we see Billy Idol with leather and lace, and adults will say that's about bondage and S&M, but a little kid just, he doesn't.
You got any 4-year-old kids who know about bondage? You got a 4-year-old kid who knows about bondage, does bondage, wants to do bondage. I think you have a unique 4-year-old. You might even have a unique 10-year-old. And if they do know about it, what's the difference? Is bondage against the law? Is leather against the law? The shoe industry is going to be pretty upset about that.
Some people have called a parallel here, saying that Luther Campbell is actually a parallel to the Willie Horton thing that George Bush threw at Dukakis. Do you see Luther Campbell as being the Willie Horton of the 1990s?
Oh, I'm not sure that that's really a good analogy, but I do detect there's a certain racist aroma to a lot of the stuff that's going on. And I've been in the rock and roll business long enough that I remember the first little leaflets that these Christian organizations were dispensing in the 50s that said, "Don't let your children buy Negro records." It's just a throwback to that. And
the hysteria of jungle rhythms.
Yeah, it's those lewd and lascivious jungle rhythms that will make your teenage daughter gyrate around, and the next thing you know, they'll be having sex with those people, and we can't have that. And what if? And basically, it gets into changing the color of the race. And these people who started this stuff years ago, I mean, this has been around since the 50s now. They're lunatics, and they are racist, and they're dangerous people. You can't ignore them. It's as if an entire segment of the population has a special kind of mental disorder, which is protected by the Constitution, by the way. If you can have the most extreme religious beliefs, and you're entitled to them, but the Constitution does provide that those extreme religious beliefs are never to be incorporated into legislation. And that is what we're running into, is they're crossing the line and converting some of their religious dogma into legislation or regulation which will affect the lives and the conduct of people who don't buy into their philosophy.
So you see significance in the fact that a black group was confronted first instead of Sam Kinison or Andrew Dice Clay?
I think that it was not just that they were black. I think that they were chosen because they're not very articulate and because they're from a small label. I can't really see these organizations going after a guy like Eddie Murphy, because he's got a few $1 million to fight him, and he can talk good. And from what I've seen of the guys from Two Live Crew, they don't make a very good impression on television.